Welcome to Getting Ghosted. This is an Intuitive Soul Collective podcast, and I'm your host, Allie Horner. Thank you for being here for the first episode. I have had this podcast on my heart for a really long time. I remember back in 2017 and 2018 talking to a friend about wanting to start a podcast, and here we are. Ending 2024 in just a couple of short months. I am literally a day off from my 39th birthday, and I'm finally starting this podcast. Only took me, 6-7 years to do it. But hey, good things come to those who wait. At least that's what I hope. So one of the questions that people ask me a lot is, what was my awakening like? And I don't always like to share all the details because it's just so detailed. But one of the things I like to talk about is spiritual awakenings, because they can be so vastly different from person to person and so unique, and yet have a lot of very common experiences during them. So to share mine, and people ask me, did you always have these abilities and gifts? Actually, I did, but I repressed them for a really long time. I remember having experiences when I was really young. I even had, at one point, I remember waking up in the middle of the night and seeing one of my great-grandparents, my great-grandfather, sitting by the foot of my bed. And I just felt this peaceful presence. I was pretty young. I think I was 3 years old, maybe 4. And I just had this knowing that this was my grandpa, but I had never met him before. And it was the weirdest thing. It was like I woke up and I just felt better that day. I remember waking up and bouncing out of bed. It wasn't scary at all. It felt like I just had someone lovingly watching over me. And from time to time, I would have these kind of medium-ish experiences where I would, kind of get these little messages or have these visions of people or know that someone was in the room with me. Even sometimes when I was out in public, I would have a sixth sense that there was someone there that no one else could see but me. And I would get a sense of who it was, but I was really, really not comfortable with this ability. So I would often shut it down and just try and close that door. But I would say, for the most part, because I was really, really trying to shut it down, I repressed a lot of stuff. And especially I was very, very intuitive, and I was, chronically picking up on things, and I was hypersensitive and hyper attuned to everything around me. And I found that very overwhelming. So I really repressed a lot of it. And the more that I repressed it, the more migraines I got and the more anxiety I had. And now those were both a result of some other things that went on in my life. I did go through quite a lot emotionally when I was really, really young, but and for a very prolonged period of time. But I really tried to shut all this down for a long time. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't into spiritual stuff. I always liked ghost stories, and I liked scary movies when I was younger and stuff like that. But I loved campfire stories, but I wasn't really into any of I wasn't looking to be a medium. I wasn't trying to be a channeler. No one in my household was talking about intuition or psychic ability or mediumship. I honestly don't remember ever having any conversations with anyone in my family about anything like that. I do remember sometimes when I would tell people Mom, why is that guy lying? Or, and he just said this, but that's not true. So I kind of knew things that were going on behind the scenes, especially with certain adults. I started to learn very quickly that if someone was saying they were fine, but you could sense that they weren't, or if they were lying about something and you were like, that's not right, this actually happened, and you just knew, even though you had no logical way of knowing. I learned very quickly that as a child you were going to get shushed and corrected and told to be quiet, and that's not polite. So that was very confusing for me at a young age, and I actively shut this down. But I had a lot of weird experiences with it over time. Like when I was in middle school, I remember having this dream, clear as day. I was walking down this one specific hallway in the middle school, and I was holding hands with this one boy. And I looked at him and I was like, I don't know who this is, but I was aware that he was my boyfriend and that he would be my boyfriend. And I woke up the next day and didn't think anything of it and just went, that was so bizarre. And I, about a month and a half later, met this guy. And I was just had that kind of chemical reaction type thing, and immediately had a weird crush on him right away. And lo and behold, just a week later, he had asked me out in a very, very seventh grade way. And we were walking down that same hallway, and I looked at him, and we were walking in exactly the same spots, and we had exactly the same clothes on that were in my dream. And I was very well aware of, oh, I dreamt this about a month ago. And I never really thought about it much, just time to time. So I've definitely had like those types of little, I guess, like psychic blips here and there during my childhood. But like I said, I repressed a lot of my intuition and psychic ability, and or a lot of the things that were happening for me intuitively. I didn't have vocabulary to describe them, so I didn't know that they were intuitions. And I find that to be the case for a lot of people once I start to point out what intuition is and how many of their experiences actually are intuition or are medium experiences where they are talking to the other side. People are going, they're like, what? Because it just blows their minds. It's like a lot of us don't realize exactly how many of these experiences that we have been truly having. And so for me, it was kind of mind blowing, but I really did try to shut it down for a long time. And I really struggled with a lot of things growing up. I had undiagnosed really bad anxiety disorder for a very, very long time. I struggled with eating disorders, pretty much for well over 10 years. And then in my 20s, I actually took a big, big intuitive move, and I moved out to Colorado a couple years after I graduated college. And it was probably the best decision I ever made. Not that it was easy in any way. I went through a lot of homesickness. I went through a lot of, starting over. I'd gotten laid off from a job in Chicago, had a whole bunch of things just really not going right when I lived there for a little bit after college. All sorts of crazy stuff, like the universe was just pushing me out of there. And so I moved to Colorado on a whim, and I knew like 2 people there. And it ended up being the best decision I'd ever made. And within a couple years of living there, I met my ex-husband and ended up having my son, who is now 10. Soon after I had my son, I had this blast of an awakening. And when I say like a blast, it was like the door to the other side blasted open overnight. I went from having no interest in spiritual or psychic stuff. Actually, like I used to see people posting about manifestation and stuff like that online, and I'd be like, what are people flipping like I would just get almost a little agitated, like, ugh, this is ridiculous. Like, come to find out, I am one of those people now. But I actually was like very, very, wasn't looking for it. And soon after I had my son, I started to realize that I'd been having visits from someone on the other side, and it was almost overnight. And I became kind of like fascinated with the afterlife. And I didn't know why. I just suddenly wanted to learn everything about it. Right around the same time, I went into a Barnes and Noble, and I was doing some holiday shopping, and out on one of those big like front display tables was Tyler Henry's book, In Between Worlds, I think what it's called, or it might be Between Two Worlds. I'll link it up in the show notes. It just stood out to me, and I had no idea who Tyler Henry was at that time. Again, I was not trying to be a medium. I didn't know I was a medium. I wasn't having any medium experiences yet, but I just was like, this is for me. I just knew this book was for me. It was almost like this little voice in my head went, that's mine. That is exactly the book I need to buy. So I went about my holiday shopping and picked up the book for myself. And then I started reading it, and I read the whole thing in like 2.5 days. I couldn't stop reading it. And I thought to myself, well, this is a pretty neat ability for someone to have. But as I was reading it, it was again like a voice inside of me said, oh, but I'm one of those people too. I have that ability, which was just bizarre because no, I didn't, not to my knowledge. And so right around that time is when I started getting these visits from this person on the other side who revealed themselves eventually to be one of my soul guides. And I also started to have contact with someone else who he's a very like popular spiritual guide for a lot of people. And he works with, I don't know how many people out there, but I started looking up all these different things, like trying to figure out what's going on with the afterlife and what is that really about. And I took it all in. I couldn't get enough. I just wanted to learn as much as I could. And right around that time, the book, The Light Between Us came to me as well. recommended several times, and I kept seeing people posting about it, etc. So I finally got myself a copy. It's by Laurel and Jackson. And as I read it, I just went, this is exactly what it was like. I was remembering everything. It wasn't like it was new information, even though I'd never talked to anyone about it before. No one had ever taught me to think that way before. No one had ever taught me about the other side. No one had ever taught me anything. It was literally just like it dawned on me, oh, I remember this now, like at a soul level. As I was reading it, it was like I already knew it was true. And so right around that time is when the door was blasting open for me. And I was kind of feeling like I didn't understand what was going on. And I felt like I would kind of catch this person standing over to the side of me just out of my peripheral vision, and I would turn and they wouldn't be there. But I had this ache in my heart and this feeling of there's someone here watching over me, but it's not anyone that I would logically know. But yet I felt completely comfortable with the feeling that they were there, except that it was confusing because I was like, I know that they want to speak to me, but I just don't understand exactly what I'm doing here. No one's teaching me. And I had this other mentor at that time who was actually helping me with, I kind of call her like an emotional wing woman, or like a kind of a little bit of a business mentor / emotional wing woman. And I finally broke down and told her what was going on with me. And I said, I just feel like this person is standing over here and it's like they're just there. And she said, well, have you ever asked them? And I thought, wait, I'm allowed, I can do that? And she said, yeah, why don't you just take a couple minutes, later tonight, take a couple breaths and sit down by yourself, close your eyes and ask them, hey, is there something you need to share with me? Is there something that you want to tell me? And so that night, that's what I did. And I remember I went and shut myself in my bathroom by myself after I'd put my kiddo to bed, who was just a baby at the time, basically. And I sat on the floor of the bathroom and I closed my eyes and I said, okay, who are you? What do you need from me? Come on in. And all of a sudden, it was like I was in this other world. It was stunning. I remember I was sitting on a surfboard facing this person that I understood. I think at the time I interpreted it very differently, but now I know it was a spiritual guide of mine. And I couldn't see their face from the neck up, but I could see the landscape. I could see us both sitting on these surfboards. And this guide was sitting there with me. And I remember the colors had this extra glow and shimmer to them. And it was like there was light infused in everything. It was like not just that everything was being hit by the light of the sun. It was like there was a light glowing from within everything. And everything had this almost like diamond-like quality or sparkle to it, except it was soft and subtle and very alive. And it felt completely peaceful to be there. And so it was like, here I am in my bathroom sitting there, but in my mind, I was completely in this ocean sitting on the surfboard talking to this person that I didn't know yet felt like I had known my entire life and probably for lifetime upon lifetime before that. And I don't remember a lot of the conversation. And from what I understand from talking to other channels, that can happen sometimes during these experiences. We just don't retain it all. I was aware that there were certain things that I was being told, but I wasn't going to be able to remember when I came back. So I remember trying to hold on to them. But I do remember a couple things that were said. And this guide said, was basically telling me I had all the time in the world and that time was irrelevant. And he basically conveyed to me that he'd always known me and would always know me and that I would always be taken care of anytime I called upon him. Outside of that, I really don't recall much more of it. But he said, we're going to be working together quite a bit now. And he said, but you're always allowed to say no. And at the same time, I remember just knowing such peace talking to him. I was like, why would I ever say no to you? I was just so aware that this being loved me unconditionally, that there was nothing I could do wrong or nothing that would disappointment or anger him or upset him ever. I was aware that he didn't exist in any of that type of energy. He didn't hold anger and resent and grief and shame or blame. It wasn't something I even needed to worry about. I just knew whatever I chose, it would be completely okay. And all of a sudden, it was over, and I opened my eyes and I was back to sitting on my bathroom floor where I had been, and I still maintained that feeling of peace. And after that day, I was having pretty much consistent, like it's almost like this like Shakti Kundalini type of energy that rolls up your spine and up through the back of your head. And it's like, all I can describe it as is pure bliss. And this went on for several months. I was having consistent daily connections. All of a sudden, I was channeling guides and teachers and hearing from people's loved ones on the other side. I was having blasts of intuition and knowing things before they happened. I remember knowing that someone was going to hit like a grand slam home run when the Cubs were in the World Series. And the only reason I knew is because I was standing in my parents' living room and the image or the vision flashed in my head. And then the next night it happened in the game. And I mean, it was just like really random, wild stuff. I was suddenly having this sixth sense about everything. And to be honest, it was a little overwhelming, and I didn't know who to talk to about it besides my mentor at the time. But she was like, hey, you know, I'm not a spiritual teacher. I'm not a spiritual coach. I don't do this type of work. But she said, but I do know people who are like you. And she let me know basically I wasn't alone, and that this was absolutely something that was going on, especially for a lot of people she worked with, even though she wasn't a psychic or a medium herself. She is very intuitive, but she doesn't describe herself as intuitive or psychic or medium channeler. That's just not what she does. So anyhow, I started to just know that this was what I was meant to be doing. And there were definitely some bumps in the road and some ups and downs. I went through a lot. It was very confusing for a little while. And I had what a lot of people would say is like kind of a late onset weird hormonal thing too that happened. And I want to talk about that part, you know, kind of like lightly, but I also want to be honest about it because I want women to know that this can happen. But I didn't know you could have like a late onset postpartum. And that's kind of what happened to me. And it was like around the same time of my spiritual awakening. I don't know that there's a coincidence in them going in hand around the timing, but I do know that I have since learned that there are so many women who are having this phenomenon happen after their firstborn comes into the world that it's actually being studied. So I will say that. And I found that out from one of my friends who actually goes to Columbia, who is in a program where they are, the whole premise of her entire master's degree is intuition and the science behind it, the spiritual side of it, the psychological side of it. She's studying it from all angles, which I think is super, super rad. But at the time I didn't know that. And no one was talking about women's hormones in that way. I wasn't being educated at all. So I did have some postpartum stuff that got mixed in with my spirituality that made me very confused for a couple, like I would say like maybe 2 months there. I got lucky. It was a pretty short-term shift on that part. It gave me a lot of anxiety. And I almost felt like a little delulu, you know, like, and I'm not going to lie, I think I was. But luckily, you know, I kind of got my feet back on the ground after, you know, a couple of like weird experiences with it, and came out of it with the help of a really great therapist who is a spiritual psychologist. So she completely believes in my abilities, didn't want to slap a label on me, but she was able to help me with figuring out getting my hormones balanced and all of that. And as soon as I got on top of it and realized what was going on, everything got a little bit more grounded. And I learned how to trust my ability and stay more grounded in it, you know, how to work on it more at an easy pace for like over time. Because for me, this had all happened so fast. It was just like the door got blasted open. And I you know, everyone who's like, oh, I just really want to be a medium. I really, really want to do this. Man, can I just, I'm like, no, I always tell people, pace yourselves. If you have the choice, go slow. Pace yourselves, stay grounded in your life, make sure you have a group and a teacher to practice with and people who can kind of pull you back down to earth if things get a little weird, people who can check in with you, help you understand what you're seeing and sensing and feeling and knowing. And so that's why I create those communities now, because I want to help with that. And I actually have 2 friends who are licensed therapists and spiritual psychologists who are coming into my communities to help me from the psychology side, so they can kind of have everyone's backs in terms of like the psychological and the therapeutic standpoint on what goes on with spiritual awakenings and make sure they're kind of watching over people. So, yeah, and I really believe in having that component there now too. But so for me, this was back, way back, 8 years ago-ish now, 8-9 years ago almost. And so at that time, after I'd gotten grounded, I got this really strong, and mind you, everything I'm talking about up to this point happened all within a period of like months. Like it was very fast. Okay. Definitely like it was like a 6-month thing. It was not a slow progress. So for me, I started getting these really strong pulls from the other side, and I was getting these like really strong feelings that I just needed to share the amazing intuitions, wisdom, and big downloads and channeled messages that I was getting from my guides and teachers on the other side. I was writing them down. I was knowing them for myself. I was having these beautiful, big conversations, and always filled with so much love and so much wisdom. And it was really helping me sort out so many things in my own life that I had been struggling with for a really long time. I noticed my anxiety melt away, like really, really quickly, to the point where it baffled my own family members. Like they'd always known me as this anxious person. And suddenly I was walking around on a little bit of a pink cloud and just looking at life very differently with the help of my guides and teachers. And I started to just feel like this needs to be shared. So at the time, Facebook was the place to be. So I started going into these different Facebook groups and started channeling my friends on the other side and my guides for people in groups. And then I started to do so in my own group. And it grew really, really rapidly into a really fun experience where I just started to meet so many more people who were like, oh my gosh, yeah, I do the same thing and I've got the same messages. And I started to feel like I wasn't alone anymore. And it wasn't so weird. And people wanted to hear me channel, and people would say, oh my God, that resonates. And people started to ask me for readings. So initially I started doing free readings for people because I didn't really know if I was a good enough psychic or medium to be charging. I knew that I had my own validations about my abilities, but I never read for other people until that point. Like I said, this was all still pretty new. So I started doing readings for free at first, and people very quickly were like, oh yeah, that's definitely, my dad that I asked for to come through, or yeah, that situation. Yeah, you got that spot on. And I went, holy shit. Like this is actually, oh my God. It was like, it made it even that much more real. So very quickly I started channeling and doing these messages, and I started doing these things called wine and woo nights, which I'm going to start hosting again. And they were like these small group reads where everyone would bring, their tea or their glass of wine or their little cocktail or whatever. And we would do collective channelings and chit chat so that people from different parts of the country, and honestly, sometimes in other countries, could get to know each other. And they're all women who are going through spiritual awakenings and wanted to meet other people who were like them, because maybe they didn't know how to talk about this with their own friends and family. And I found that to be very common. So I started like hosting these little community gatherings online. And then soon enough, people were asking me, do you host classes? Do you teach? And I started going, maybe I should. And then not long after that, it kind of dawned on me, like I just had this whole lesson plan for a course roll out in my brain, and I ended up calling it Infinitely Wise Women. So keep in mind, this is back 2017, 2018. Or 2017 actually. So, there we go. I rolled it out, and, to my surprise, it ended up completely filling up, and it was so much fun to teach. And I met so many wonderful people that I just kept wanting to teach. And soon I was hosting, retreats and gatherings and giving spaces where these women could get to know each other. And many of them stayed friends throughout the years after they met. And, yeah, so that's a lot of like how my awakening happened. And, in the last couple of years, I've taken breaks on and off with my abilities, so almost so like I could learn some new things, reach some new heights with it, get grounded in different areas. The pandemic happened, and that really threw me mentally and emotionally in certain ways. But throughout it all, my guides and teachers and my loved ones on the other side have not abandoned me once. And I found that having their wisdom, guidance, and advice was really helpful for me and many people who still hired me for private readings throughout the years. And so just about 2 years ago now, I got a nudge again to get on TikTok. And I didn't really fully understand it. But all of a sudden, I felt like I had to I created my Spirit Speaker 25 account. And on that account, I ended up doing a couple of like mediumship I put out some messages that I was getting from some people on the other side. And for whatever reason, they just caught traction right off the bat. And it wasn't like mass amounts, but I think I had like over 125,000 views on the first one, which floored me. I did not expect that. I just had that pull again to share messages that were coming through. And so I did on a new account, and there we go. It just took off. And before I knew it, I had the pull to do live readings on TikTok. And so that's where we are now. I still do live readings on TikTok. I have created a lot of videos. I do a lot of these like slideshow videos where we talk about really great messages I've gotten in quotes from that people have said from the other side during readings, things my spirit guides want to share with people, or they wish we knew about everyday life, or being human. I love to share things about spiritual awakenings. And yeah, that's part of why I created the podcast. But I hope that, when it comes to spiritual awakenings, I know that they can be really weird. And like I said, some of them are really beautiful and blissful for some people. And for other people, they're very confusing and very disorienting. And I want to say one of the lessons I learned is prioritize your mental health. If you ever feel like you are getting messages or signs or signals that are scaring you, that is not the other side. So I definitely want to say, make sure that you are, working. You can always find a really great, spiritual therapist who's not going to slap a label on you, but they will know, look for someone who works with people like you, who will be able to help you through what's going on. They're definitely out there. Absolutely. They are. And there's no reason you should go through it alone if it's overwhelming. And I always tell people there's no shame in going to therapy. You deserve support. You're a human trying to human. We've gone through a lot of things on this earth, pandemic being one. And there's absolutely no reason that you should be doing this alone or feel like that you have to keep it to yourself or do it alone. And you can absolutely find the perfect mental, emotional, spiritual support out there. I cannot tell you how many readings I've done for people who are mental health professionals, like licensed therapists, licensed psychiatrists, people who work in mental health facilities, who have come to me and asked me for readings because they too are mediums and they're trying to sort out their mediumship abilities. So they are out there, I'm telling you. You don't need to be worried about, going to therapy and getting support on the journey. There are definitely people out there who will understand, and they may very well be like you, or know people like you and be totally comfortable with it. So just keep that in mind. And yeah, well, I hope that this kind of explains a little bit of my background. I still do readings. I still do classes. I have a course that's up on my website. And yeah, it sounded like it was just time to start the podcast, but that is the story of my spiritual awakening. But I'd love to hear from you as well. What are your stories about your spiritual awakenings? Make sure you leave a little note on the blog post that'll be connected to this podcast, and hop in the comments and share your stories, or share more questions that you have about awakenings, or about your spiritual abilities, about the other side, about certain gifts that you have, things you're confused about, things you're curious about. I will be here to answer them.